poor single dad invites a beggar to dinner, unaware she's a secret billionaire searching for something money can't buy. What starts as a simple act of kindness turns into a life-changing bond as she becomes part of his world, helping his children and stealing his heart. But she's hiding a secret that could destroy everything, and the people hunting her are closing in. When love is built on a lie, can the truth bring them closer or tear them apart forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Rain hammered against the windows of the small apartment, each drop a reminder of the leaky roof Nathaniel Bennett couldn't afford to fix. He stood at the kitchen counter, stretching a pound of ground beef with breadcrumbs to feed 3 hungry mouths. The electricity bill lay open beside him, the red "Final Notice" stamp like a fresh wound. "Dad." Lucy appeared in the doorway, her 12-year-old face too serious for her age. "Ms. Peterson says we need new science notebooks by Monday. The old ones are full." Nathaniel's stomach tightened. Payday was still a week away, and after the car repair Timothy had needed for his asthma medication, there wasn't a spare dollar to their name. "Can we use the back pages of last year's math notebook?" he suggested, hating the words as they left his mouth. Lucy's shoulders dropped slightly, but she nodded. "Sure, Dad. I'll make it work." Her maturity broke his heart. She'd been making it work since her mother died 3 years ago, growing up too fast while he worked double shifts at Harmon's garage. "Lucy girl, I promise next month." "It's okay." She forced a smile. "Timothy's waiting for his chess lesson. He's set up the board already." Through the thin walls, Nathaniel heard his 8-year-old son coughing, another worry to add to the pile. "Dinner in 20, he called as Lucy disappeared down the hallway. The hamburger helper was simmering when a movement outside the kitchen window caught his eye. Through the rain-streaked glass, he spotted a figure hunched behind the apartment dumpsters, thin hands searching through discarded bags. Nathaniel squinted. It was a woman, drenched to the bone, her clothes hanging in tatters. Something about her deliberate movements seemed at odds with her desperate situation. Without thinking, he grabbed an umbrella and headed downstairs. The woman didn't notice him approach, too focused on opening a sealed container someone had thrown away. "Miss," Nathaniel called softly. She startled, dropping the container. Up close, he could see her face, striking features despite being gaunt with hunger, and eyes that held a dignity that surprised him. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, her voice carrying an unexpected refinement. "I'll move along. Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to come up for dinner." The words tumbled out before he could reconsider. "Nothing fancy, just hamburger helper, but it's hot and there's plenty." She stared at him, suspicion warring with hope. Why would you offer that to a stranger? Nathaniel shrugged, rain soaking through his worn flannel shirt. "Because it's pouring, you look hungry, and my mama raised me better than to eat while someone else goes without." A long moment passed before she spoke. "I'm Vina. Nathaniel Bennett. My kids, Lucy and Timothy, are upstairs. You'd invite someone like me around your children?" Her voice held genuine surprise. "Someone like you?" He tilted his head. "You mean someone who's having a rough time?" "Been there myself, ma'am." For the first time, her face softened. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Just Nathaniel. Please." Upstairs, the children's curiosity quickly overcame their shyness. Timothy, always the more outgoing of the two, immediately showed Vina his chess set, while Lucy set an extra place at their small table. "Do you play?" Vina asked Timothy, gesturing to the chess pieces. "Dad's teaching me," Timothy answered, breaking into a coughing fit. Nathaniel handed him his inhaler, noticing how Vina's eyes tracked the movement with concern. Over dinner, hamburger helper stretched with extra noodles, Nathaniel observed their guest. Despite her ragged appearance, Vina held her fork with unexpected grace. She answered the children's questions kindly but vaguely, revealing little about herself. "This is delicious," she said, though Nathaniel knew it was barely passable. "Dad's the best cook," Timothy declared loyally. "He makes pancakes shaped like dinosaurs on Sundays." "Only when we have eggs," Lucy added pragmatically. Vina's eyes met Nathaniel's across the table. "You have wonderful children." "They make it easy," he replied, feeling an unexpected warmth at her words. As the meal progressed, Nathaniel noticed how Vina watched their family interactions with a mixture of curiosity and longing. When Lucy automatically helped Timothy cut his food, and when Nathaniel gently wiped a spot of sauce from his son's chin, Vina's expression revealed a profound hunger that had nothing to do with food. The simple meal stretched longer than usual, filled with Timothy's enthusiastic stories and Lucy's thoughtful questions. For one evening, the weight of bills and worries seemed lighter in the presence of their unexpected guest. After dinner, Vina helped clear the dishes despite Nathaniel's protests. As Lucy supervised Timothy's bedtime routine, Nathaniel walked their unexpected guest to the door. "Thank you," Vina said softly. "I haven't experienced a family dinner like that in a very long time." "You're welcome back any time," Nathaniel offered, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Her eyes widened slightly. "You hardly know me." "Sometimes you just get a feeling about people," he replied with a shrug. "Besides, Timothy's already decided you're his new chess partner." A week later, Vina returned, this time with clean clothes and her hair neatly combed. She brought a small, second-hand chess set for Timothy that made the boy's eyes light up. Over the following weeks, her visits became regular, each one revealing more of the mystery that surrounded her. But Vivian Blackwood, not Vina, had a life beyond these walls. In the privacy of her modest hotel room across town, Vivian stared at newspaper clippings and financial records spread across the bed. The headline from 18 months ago still felt like a knife. "Blackwood couple lost at sea. Yacht accident claims prominent philanthropists." Her parents' smiling faces stared back at her from the article. Below was a smaller photo of Raymond Huxley, looking appropriately somber as he discussed carrying on the Blackwood legacy as their financial executor. Vivian's hands trembled as she reviewed the maintenance record she'd secretly obtained. The yacht had been thoroughly inspected just 2 weeks before the accident. The sabotage had been expertly done, undetectable to investigators, but devastating in its effect. She picked up a photo of Huxley at her parents' memorial service, his arm around her shoulders in a show of support. His eyes, even in the photograph, held a coldness she'd been too grief-stricken to notice then. Since disappearing from her privileged life 6 months ago, leaving behind only a note about needing space to grieve, she'd been tracking the money. Millions had been siphoned from Blackwood accounts through a labyrinth of offshore companies, all leading back to shell corporations she'd traced to Huxley. Her phone buzzed with a text from her only ally, her parents' former security chief who'd been conveniently fired by Huxley after their deaths. "He's looking for you. Hired private investigators. Be careful." Vivian closed her eyes, thinking of the Bennett family. Their genuine warmth contrasted sharply with the artificial world she'd grown up in. Cocktail parties where smiles never reached eyes, friendships based on social advantage, relationships calculated for business benefit. Nathaniel had shared that he needed to work overtime at the garage all weekend. Lucy, at 12, was responsible enough to watch Timothy, but Vivian saw the worry in Nathaniel's eyes about leaving them alone for so long. "I could stay with them," she'd offered impulsively, "if you trust me enough." The relief on his face had been immediate, though he'd tried to hide it. "Are you sure? They can be a handful." "I'm sure," she'd said, meaning it more than he could know. Now, as Saturday afternoon sunlight filtered through the Bennett apartment's thin curtains, Vivian watched Timothy concentrating on their chess game while Lucy read nearby. The children had accepted her presence easily, with the resilience of young hearts. "Check," Timothy announced proudly. Vivian examined the board, impressed by his improvement. "Very good. Your dad's been teaching you well." "Dad says chess is like life," Timothy explained, his small face serious. "You have to think ahead." The words struck Vivian deeply. Thinking ahead was exactly what she needed to do, for herself and, increasingly, for this family that had unwittingly given her something priceless: authenticity. While the children were distracted with a movie later, Vivian slipped into the kitchen. From her purse, she removed an envelope containing $500, a tiny fraction of her fortune, but enough to make a difference here. She tucked it beneath the cookie jar, where Nathaniel would eventually find it. That wasn't enough. In the bathroom, she hid another $100 in the medicine cabinet, near Timothy's asthma medication. In Lucy's room, she carefully placed $50 inside a notebook, and in Timothy's dresser drawer, another $50. With each hidden gift, Vivian felt a weight lifting. For years, her wealth had been a burden, a wall between herself and genuine connection. Now, it could serve a purpose, helping this family that had offered her kindness without expecting anything in return. She heard Lucy laugh at something in the movie, the sound pure and unguarded. Vivian leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by emotion. These children, this home, they represented everything her parents had valued beyond money: integrity, love, family. And Nathaniel, with his quiet dignity and unwavering devotion to his children, had shown her more about true character in a few weeks than she'd witnessed in years among the wealthy elite. Vivian returns regularly as Vina, gradually integrating into the family's daily routines. One morning, the handmade chess pieces took shape beneath Vivian's careful fingers. She'd found discarded metal scraps in Nathaniel's workshop: nuts, bolts, washers, and small springs that transformed into kings, queens, knights, and pawns with a little imagination and wire to hold them together. "That's going to be a rook, right?" Timothy asked, watching intently as she twisted another piece into form. "Good eye," Vivian smiled, handing him the finished tower. "What do you think?" Timothy turned it over in his small hands, eyes wide with wonder. "It's perfect. Dad's going to love these." Over the past few weeks, Vivian had established a comfortable routine with the Bennett family. 3 afternoons a week, she'd arrive as Vina, the kind homeless woman Nathaniel had invited to dinner, now a trusted friend who helped with the children while he worked. "Can we play a game when you finish the last piece?" Timothy asked, arranging the metal figures on the kitchen table. "Absolutely. I think you might even beat me this time." Vivian meant it. Timothy was a quick study, absorbing strategies and thinking several moves ahead. Lucy appeared in the doorway, arms full of supplies. "Are you guys still playing with those rusty old things? We need the table for my science project. It's due tomorrow." "They're not rusty. They're artistic," Timothy protested, but carefully moved the chess pieces to make room. Vivian helped Lucy arrange her materials: baking soda, vinegar, red food coloring, cardboard, and modeling clay. "A volcano, huh? Classic choice." "Ms. Winters said we could do something simple as long as we understand the chemical reaction." Lucy meticulously shaped the clay around a plastic bottle. "I've been reading about actual volcanoes too. Did you know some eruptions are so powerful they can affect global temperatures?" "I did know that," Vivian said, impressed by Lucy's curiosity. "The 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora caused the year without a summer." Lucy looked up, eyes bright. "You know about that?" "Dad tries, but he says science wasn't his best subject." "I had good teachers," Vivian said carefully, avoiding mention of her private education. "Let's make this volcano worthy of Tambora." For the next hour, they shaped and painted the volcano while Timothy alternated between helping and practicing chess moves. When the structure was complete, Lucy carefully measured baking soda into the bottle. "Now for the vinegar," Vivian said, holding the measuring cup. "Ready for eruption?" "Wait." Lucy grabbed her notebook. I need to record observations. Scientists always document their work. Vivian nodded approvingly. Timothy leaned in close. Can we make it extra big? Well, Vivian hesitated, then grinned. Why not? It's for science. She poured the vinegar, but instead of the expected small reaction, the volcano practically exploded. Red-tinted foam gushed over the table, splashing onto the floor and across their clothes. Whoa! Timothy jumped back, laughing. Too much baking soda. Lucy gasped, trying to contain the flow with paper towels that quickly became saturated. Vivian grabbed a dish towel, attempting to dam the red tide creeping across the kitchen floor. Quick, more towels! They scrambled to control the mess, slipping on the slick floor, dissolving into laughter at their failed attempts. Vivian's carefully maintained composure crumbled as Timothy slid across the floor like a hockey player, shrieking with delight. The front door opened. What in the world? Nathaniel stood frozen, taking in the disaster scene, his kitchen covered in red foam, his children and Vina splattered from head to toe. Vivian straightened, suddenly self-conscious, a dripping towel in her hands. Science experiment, slight miscalculation. For one terrible moment, Nathaniel's face remained unreadable. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched. A chuckle escaped, growing into full-throated laughter that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Dad, Lucy protested, though she was smiling. It's not funny. My project is ruined. I think, Nathaniel said, stepping carefully through the foam to join them. This is exactly what science is about. Trial and error, right? He grabbed a towel and knelt beside them. As they cleaned together, Nathaniel reached over and playfully dabbed baking soda on Vivian's nose. You've got a little something there, he said, his voice softer than usual. Vivian froze, feeling a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with embarrassment. Their eyes held for a moment too long, something unspoken passing between them. Dad, look what Vina made. Timothy broke the moment, proudly displaying the chess pieces. These are incredible, Nathaniel said, examining them with genuine admiration. You made these from my scrap bin. One person's junk is another's treasure, Vivian said, oddly breathless. Later, after the kitchen was cleaned and the children in bed, Nathaniel approached her awkwardly. I found more money in the apartment, he said quietly. $100 in the medicine cabinet this time. Vivian kept her expression neutral. Strange. I can't accept charity, Vina. His voice was firm, but gentle. I appreciate whatever you're trying to do, but I need to provide for my family myself. Maybe it's not charity, she suggested. Maybe it's just kindness, like inviting a stranger to dinner. Nathaniel studied her face, confusion evident in his eyes. There's something about you I can't quite figure out. Is that bad? She asked softly. No, he admitted. Just unexpected. The following Saturday dawned with a surprising warmth for early spring. Nathaniel checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes, then adjusted the picnic basket in the passenger seat of his battered pickup truck. He hadn't been on anything resembling a date since before Sarah's diagnosis. The thought made his stomach tighten. When he pulled up to the corner where Vina waited, her face lit up in a way that eased his nerves. She wore a simple sundress that looked secondhand, but somehow seemed elegant on her. A picnic? She asked, climbing into his truck. You didn't have to go to all this trouble. It's nothing fancy, he said, suddenly self-conscious about the sandwiches and store-brand soda packed inside. Just thought you might like to see the lighthouse. Best view in town. Vivian hesitated before accepting his invitation. Getting closer to Nathaniel meant deeper deception. Raymond Huxley's men were still searching for her, and entangling this family in her troubles was selfish. Yet something about Nathaniel's quiet strength drew her like nothing she'd experienced in her privileged life. I'd love to, she'd finally said, knowing she should refuse. The lighthouse stood on a rocky outcropping at the edge of town. its white tower stark against the blue sky. Nathaniel spread a worn blanket on a grassy patch overlooking the water. "Lucy made the cookies," he said, unpacking the basket. Fair warning, she experiments. Vivian bit into one. "Cinnamon and potato chips?" "Told you." He laughed. "She's going through a fusion cuisine phase after watching some cooking show." They ate sandwiches and talked about small things: the town's history, Timothy's latest chess strategies, the antique motorcycle Nathaniel was restoring in his spare time. Vivienne found herself relaxing, the constant vigilance she'd maintained for months easing in his presence. "You're good with them," Nathaniel said suddenly. "The kids, I mean. They light up when you're around." "They're easy to love," she answered honestly, then looked away, surprised by her own words. Dark clouds rolled in without warning, a spring shower threatening their peaceful afternoon. Fat raindrops began to fall as they hastily packed the basket. "The lighthouse," Nathaniel called over the increasing downpour. "The keeper's room should be open." They ran, laughing as they were soaked, Nathaniel holding the blanket over their heads in a futile attempt to stay dry. The old wooden door of the lighthouse keeper's quarters creaked open, welcoming them into its musty shelter. "Some date," Nathaniel muttered, setting down the dripping basket. "It's perfect," Vivian said, meaning it. The simplicity, the lack of pretense, it was everything her former life had lacked. The small room contained a wooden table, a few chairs, and a logbook for visitors. Nathaniel found an old space heater that still worked and spread their damp blanket near it. They sat side by side, watching raindrops race down the single window as the lighthouse beam swept rhythmically through the growing darkness. "Sarah loved this place," Nathaniel said quietly, breaking a comfortable silence. "We'd bring the kids when they were little. She'd tell them stories about sailors finding their way home." Vivian remained silent, giving him space to continue. 3 years, he said, his voice rough. 3 years since the cancer took her. Some days it feels like yesterday. The beam from the lighthouse swept across his face, illuminating the grief still etched there. "Does it get easier?" he asked, not looking at her. "I lost my parents," Vivian said carefully. "Not the same, I know. But the emptiness, it changes shape rather than disappears." She could tell him about the yacht accident, about her suspicions of murder, but not about the fortune or her true identity. Yet the loneliness she described was entirely real. "The hardest part is the children," Nathaniel continued, "watching them grow up without her. Timothy barely remembers her now." Vivian reached for his hand, her fingers closing around his calloused palm. "They have you. That matters more than you know." His eyes met hers. Vulnerability and strength mingled there. The lighthouse beam swept through the room again, casting them in momentary brightness before returning to shadow. "Vina," he whispered, leaning closer. She knew she should pull away. Every moment with him deepened a deception that would eventually unravel. Instead, she closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle, hesitant, a question more than a declaration. His hand rose to touch her cheek with such tenderness that tears pricked behind her eyelids. The lighthouse beam swept over them once more, illuminating two people finding unexpected shelter in each other, despite the secrets between them. The morning after their rain-soaked lighthouse encounter, Vivian woke early in her rented room above the hardware store, her lips still tingling from Nathaniel's kiss. She touched them gently, remembering the tenderness in his eyes. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a simple life here, being just Vina, loving a good man and his children, leaving behind the weight of the Blackwood legacy. The fantasy dissolved as she opened her laptop. Reality couldn't be avoided. 3 new emails from her private investigator contained financial records she'd requested from the Blackwood holdings. She studied the documents carefully, her trained eye catching discrepancies that would escape most observers. "There you are," she whispered, highlighting a series of transactions. Raymond had been clever, siphoning small amounts from multiple accounts, but the pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Over the past 5 years, he'd embezzled millions, starting shortly before her parents' accident. She printed the documents and added them to a locked case beneath her bed. The evidence was mounting, but still circumstantial. She needed more to bring him down without exposing herself to danger. Later that afternoon, Vivian found herself in Nathaniel's tiny kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She'd offered to cook, claiming her mother had taught her, a rare truth among her many lies. Timothy sat at the table, working on math homework while Lucy helped set the table. "Dad's been smiling more since you started coming around," Lucy said matter-of-factly, placing forks beside the mismatched plates. Vivian nearly cut her finger at the girl's directness. "Has he?" "Yeah," Timothy chimed in without looking up from his worksheet. "He whistles in the morning now. He didn't do that before." The simple observation made Vivian's chest tighten. She was bringing joy to this family, but also deception. Every smile Nathaniel gave her was based on a false premise. He was falling for a woman who didn't exist. The front door opened, and Nathaniel entered, smelling of motor oil and carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. "From Mrs. Peterson's yard," he explained with a sheepish smile. "Her car wouldn't start, so I fixed it for free. She insisted I take these for my lady friend." Vivian's cheeks warmed as she accepted them. "They're beautiful." Their fingers brushed, and the electricity from their lighthouse kiss sparked between them again. Nathaniel's eyes lingered on hers before he turned to wash up for dinner. As they ate, Vivian noticed Nathaniel's distracted expression. Several times he started to speak, then stopped himself. She recognized his discomfort. He was wrestling with something. "How was your doctor's appointment, Timothy?" she asked, trying to ease the tension. "Boring," the boy replied, pushing peas around his plate. "But they had cool magazines. I saw a lady who looked just like you, Vina." The fork slipped from Vivian's fingers, clattering against her plate. "Oh?" "Yeah, on the cover of some business thing. She had fancier clothes, though, and her hair was different." The water glass Vivian was reaching for tipped over, shattering against the edge of the table. She gasped as a shard sliced her palm, blood welling immediately. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, staring at the broken glass in horror, a perfect metaphor for what she was doing to this family. "Don't move," Nathaniel said firmly, grabbing a clean kitchen towel. He knelt beside her chair, gently taking her bleeding hand in his. "Lucy, get the first aid kit from the bathroom." His touch was tender as he pressed the towel against her cut. "It's not too deep," he murmured, his eyes meeting hers with concern rather than suspicion. Lucy returned with the kit, and Nathaniel carefully cleaned and bandaged the wound. His fingers worked with surprising gentleness for a man who spent his days with engines and tools. "There," he said, his thumb brushing over her bandaged palm. "Good as new." Later, after the children had gone to bed, Nathaniel sat beside Vivian on the worn sofa. The broken glass had been swept away, but the tension remained. "Vina," he began hesitantly, "I need to ask you something." Her heart raced. Had he connected Timothy's magazine sighting to her? Was he about to confront her about her true identity? "I keep finding money around the apartment," he said instead, his voice low. "At first I thought I was misplacing things, but it's happened too often. $20 in a coffee can, $50 in my work jacket, $100 tucked in the electric bill." Vivian stared at her bandaged hand, unable to meet his eyes. "Is it you?" he asked directly. "Nathaniel, Because if it is," he continued, "I need you to stop. I don't know your situation and I don't need to. But I can take care of my family." The pride in his voice made her chest ache. She'd meant the money as a kindness, but instead had wounded his dignity. "I understand," she whispered, finally looking up at him. "It won't happen again." He nodded, studying her face. "There's something about you, Vina. Something you're not telling me. Whenever you're ready to talk about it, I'm here." His hand found hers, careful of the bandage, and in that moment, Vivian knew she was falling hopelessly in love with a man she had no right to love. A man who deserved far better than the web of lies she'd spun around them both. 2 days later, Timothy's fever came without warning. By morning, the boy could barely lift his head from the pillow, his small body burning with heat that made Nathaniel's heart race with fear. At the emergency room, the doctors exchanged concerned glances as they examined Timothy's rash-covered arms and listened to his labored breathing. "We need to admit him immediately," the doctor said, her face grave. "This appears to be a rare bacterial infection that's affecting his lungs and bloodstream. We'll start aggressive antibiotics, but he may need specialized treatment." Nathaniel stood frozen as they wheeled his son away, Timothy's favorite stuffed dinosaur clutched weakly in his small hand. The hospital administrator approached with clipboard in hand, his expression sympathetic but firm as he discussed insurance coverage, treatment costs, and payment plans. The numbers blurred before Nathaniel's eyes, thousands of dollars that he simply didn't have. His mind raced through his meager assets, the old truck he needed for work, the tools that were his livelihood, the few pieces of jewelry his wife had left behind that he'd been saving for Lucy's graduation. "I'll figure something out," he promised, signing the forms with a shaking hand. For 3 days, Nathaniel barely left Timothy's side, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair when exhaustion overtook him. Lucy stayed with a neighbor, visiting after school with handmade cards from Timothy's classmates. Vivian came each evening after Nathaniel called her with the news, bringing home-cooked meals that he barely touched and offering quiet support. On the 4th night, when Timothy's fever still raged despite the antibiotics, the specialist delivered the news Nathaniel had been dreading. "He needs a specific treatment protocol. It's expensive, but it's his best chance," the doctor explained. "The standard antibiotics aren't working fast enough." After the doctor left, Nathaniel pressed his palms against his eyes, fighting back tears. His toolbox, the specialized equipment he'd collected over 15 years of work, was worth a few thousand. It would be enough for a down payment on the treatment, even if selling it meant he couldn't work efficiently for months. "I'll do whatever it takes," he whispered to his sleeping son, smoothing back the damp hair from his forehead. Later that night, Vivian arrived to find Nathaniel asleep in the chair beside Timothy's bed, his hand protectively holding his son's smaller one. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and even in sleep, worry lined his face. His work boots were scuffed, his clothes rumpled from days of hospital vigil. The sight broke something open inside her. This man, this father who would sacrifice everything for his children, had shown her what real love looked like. Not the calculated social connections of her world, but something fierce and unbreakable. Tears filled her eyes as she watched them. Timothy stirred restlessly, his fever causing him to whimper in his sleep. Without waking Nathaniel, Vivian moved to the other side of the bed and gently stroked Timothy's forehead. "Shh," she whispered, beginning to sing a lullaby her own mother had sung to her as a child. Her voice was soft but clear in the quiet room, the melody simple and soothing. Timothy's restless movements calmed as she continued to stroke his hot forehead, singing words of comfort and protection. Nathaniel woke to the sound of her voice but remained still, watching through half-closed eyes as this woman he'd invited in from the rain now tended to his son with such genuine tenderness. Something tightened in his chest, a recognition of what had been growing between them these past weeks. When Timothy had drifted back to sleep, Vivian looked up to find Nathaniel watching her, his eyes bright with emotion. "Let's step outside for a minute," he whispered, carefully extracting his hand from Timothy's. In the dim hallway outside Timothy's room, they stood close together, the hospital's night sounds creating a bubble of privacy around them. "I've been thinking about selling my tools," Nathaniel confessed, his voice rough with exhaustion, "for Timothy's treatment." Vivian's heart clenched. "Nathaniel, but that's not what I wanted to tell you." He took her hands in his thumbs brushing over her knuckles. "Seeing you with Timothy just now. Vina, I need you to know that I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable in the sterile hospital hallway. "I know it's fast, and God knows my life is complicated," he continued. "But watching you with my children, the way you fit into our lives, I haven't felt this way since I lost my wife. I didn't think I could feel this way again." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes as guilt and love warred within her. She was about to risk everything, her cover, her investigation, perhaps even her safety, to save Timothy. And now, Nathaniel's heart too lay exposed before her. Vivian stood in the hospital hallway long after Nathaniel had returned to Timothy's bedside, her heart torn between the love she felt and the deception she maintained. Timothy's labored breathing from the room behind her made the decision clear. She couldn't watch this child suffer when she had the means to help him. Finding a quiet corner near the hospital's coffee shop, she made a call on a secure phone she rarely used. "This is Vivian Blackwood," she said quietly. "I need to arrange for specialized medical treatment. Yes, full confidentiality is essential." Within hours, the hospital staff was buzzing with activity. Timothy was transferred to a private room in the pediatric wing, and a team of specialists arrived with equipment not typically available at the small regional hospital. Nathaniel watched in bewilderment as his son was whisked away for tests he couldn't pronounce, let alone afford. When he approached the administrative office to discuss payment, the clerk smiled politely. "Everything has been arranged, Mr. Bennett. An anonymous benefactor has covered all expenses." Nathaniel's brow furrowed. "That's not possible. Who would do that?" "I'm sorry, sir. The donation was made with strict confidentiality requirements." When Vivian arrived that evening, Nathaniel was sitting beside Timothy's bed in the new private room, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time in days. The specialized antibiotics were already working. Timothy's fever had broken, and color was returning to his cheeks. "The strangest thing happened," Nathaniel said, his voice a mix of relief and suspicion. "Someone paid for everything: specialists, private room, experimental treatments. They won't tell me who." Vivian avoided his eyes, busying herself with arranging the flowers she'd brought. "That's wonderful news. A miracle." "Vina." Nathaniel's voice stopped her fidgeting hands. "Do you know anything about this?" She turned to face him, her heart pounding. "I'm just grateful he's getting better." Nathaniel studied her face. "It's a strange coincidence. You disappear for a few hours, and suddenly Timothy gets transferred to a room that costs more per night than I make in a week." Before Vivian could respond, Timothy stirred and opened his eyes. "Hey, buddy," Nathaniel said, immediately turning his attention to his son. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Timothy said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Is Vina staying for dinner?" The moment passed, but Vivian felt Nathaniel's questions lingering in the air between them. In his downtown office, Raymond Huxley frowned at his computer screen. An alert from his security team highlighted an unusual transaction: a significant payment from a dormant Blackwood family account to Coastal Regional Hospital. "Find out who authorized this," he snapped at his assistant, "and get me everything on any patients receiving special treatment at that hospital." His fingers drummed on the polished desk. For 3 years, he'd maintained control of the Blackwood fortune, while the heiress played at being ordinary. If she had evidence against him, if she was making moves, he needed to know. 3 days later, Timothy was discharged. The doctors called his recovery remarkable, attributing it to the specialized treatment protocol. Lucy had decorated the apartment with welcome home signs, and Nathaniel carried his son inside with a lightness he hadn't felt in weeks. After the children went to bed, exhausted from the homecoming celebration, Nathaniel offered to drive Vivian back to her small rented room across town. "Thank you," Vivian said as they pulled up outside the modest boarding house. "Not just for the ride, for letting me be part of your family these past weeks." Nathaniel turned off the engine, the moonlight casting soft shadows across his tired face. "I still have questions, Vina. About who you really are. About Timothy's treatment." "I know," she whispered. He reached across the seat and touched her cheek. "But tonight, I'm just grateful. My son is home. And you're here." The tenderness in his voice broke through her defenses. When he leaned across to kiss her, she met him halfway. Unlike their hesitant first kiss at the lighthouse, this one deepened with unspoken need and relief. "Come inside," she whispered against his lips. In her small room, moonlight spilled through thin curtains as they slowly undressed each other. Nathaniel's hands, calloused from years of mechanical work, traced her skin with reverence. Vivian let herself be fully present, pushing away thoughts of Raymond, of her investigation, of the danger that might be closing in. For this night, there was only Nathaniel's touch, his whispered words of affection, and the connection that had grown between them despite the secrets she kept. The next day, the aroma of vanilla and cinnamon filled Nathaniel's small kitchen as Vivian showed Lucy how to roll cookie dough into perfect spheres. "The secret is to not handle it too much," Vivian explained, demonstrating with gentle movements. "Your hands warm the butter and make the cookies spread too thin." Lucy nodded seriously, her tongue poking out in concentration as she mimicked Vivian's technique. "Dad's gonna love these. He has such a sweet tooth." Vivian smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the preheated oven. These domestic moments with Nathaniel's children had become precious to her, a glimpse of the normal life she'd never known. Timothy sat at the kitchen table, arranging the chess pieces Vivian had carved for him. "Can we play after the cookies are done, Vina?" "Of course we..." Vivian's response was cut short by a sharp knock at the door. Something about the forceful rapping sent a chill through her. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, instinctively moving between the children and the door. "Stay here," she whispered. Through the peephole, she saw two broad-shouldered men in dark suits, men she recognized as Raymond's security team. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she backed away from the door. "Lucy," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her panic, "take Timothy and go to that special place your dad made. Right now." Lucy's eyes widened with understanding. After their mother died, Nathaniel had converted a small storage space between the walls into a hiding spot for emergencies, a place where the children could feel safe when grief overwhelmed them. "What's happening?" Timothy asked, clutching his chess pieces. "It's like a game," Vivian said, trying to sound calm. "Hide and seek, go with Lucy, and don't come out until your dad or I come for you." The pounding on the door grew louder. "We know you're in there, Ms. Blackwood," a deep voice called. Lucy grabbed her brother's hand. "Come on, Timmy, like we practiced." As the children disappeared into the hallway, the front door splintered open. Two men burst in, followed by a third, a lean, hawk-faced man Vivian recognized as one of Raymond's most trusted enforcers. "Ms. Blackwood," he said with cold formality, "Mr. Huxley would like a word about your recent activities." Vivian backed toward the kitchen, her mind racing. "I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Vina. I'm just visiting friends." "Your performance as a vagrant was quite convincing," the man said, advancing slowly. "But the game is over. Mr. Huxley is particularly interested in some financial records you accessed last week." The sound of a truck engine cut through the tension. Nathaniel was home. "You need to leave," Vivian said, desperation edging her voice. This family has nothing to do with any of this. On the contrary, they have everything to do with it now. The front door opened, and Nathaniel stepped in, still wearing his work coveralls. He froze at the sight of the intruders. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his eyes darting between the men and Vivian. "Mr. Bennett," the hawk-faced man said smoothly. "A pleasure. We're here to collect Ms. Blackwood. She's been quite deceptive about her identity." Confusion flickered across Nathaniel's face. "Blackwood?" "Don't listen to them," Vivian pleaded. "Nathaniel, these men work for Raymond Huxley. He's dangerous." One of the men lunged for her, but Nathaniel moved with surprising speed. He tackled the larger man, sending them both crashing into the coffee table. "Run, Vina!" he shouted, grappling with the enforcer. The second man pulled a baton from his jacket. Vivian grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove and swung it with all her strength, connecting with his arm. He howled in pain but kept coming. Nathaniel had managed to overpower the first man, but the hawk-faced leader pulled out a gun. Enough of this. Vivian saw the weapon swing toward Nathaniel and threw herself forward, but Nathaniel was faster. He shoved her aside and took the full impact of the pistol whip across his temple. Blood sprayed as he crumpled to the floor. "Nathaniel!" Vivian screamed. The hawk-faced man raised his gun again, but the momentary distraction gave Nathaniel, dazed and bleeding, enough time to sweep the man's legs out from under him. The gun clattered across the floor. "Back door!" Nathaniel gasped, staggering to his feet and pulling Vivian toward the kitchen. They stumbled out into the alley behind the apartment building, Nathaniel leaning heavily against her. Blood streamed from the gash on his head, soaking his shirt. "The children," he mumbled, his steps faltering. "They're hidden," Vivian assured him, supporting his weight as they moved as quickly as his injury allowed. "They know what to do." Behind them, shouting and the sound of pursuit grew closer. Vivienne guided Nathaniel across the street toward Mac's auto shop where he worked. The side door was locked, but Nathaniel fumbled in his pocket for keys, his movements growing more uncoordinated. "Stay with me," she urged as she unlocked the door and helped him inside. They collapsed behind a partially disassembled engine, hidden from view of the windows. Nathaniel's breathing was labored, his face alarmingly pale beneath the smear of blood. "Who are you?" he whispered, his eyes struggling to focus on her face. Vivian pressed her hand against his wound, trying to slow the bleeding. "I'll explain everything. I promise. But first we need to get you help." Nathaniel drifted in and out of consciousness, the hospital room swimming before his eyes. The steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell eventually anchored him back to reality. His head throbbed beneath the bandages, a reminder of the blow he'd taken. As his vision cleared, he saw Vivian, or whoever she really was, sitting beside his bed, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. "The kids?" he croaked, his throat dry. "They're safe," Vivian assured him quickly. "Detective Miller has them under police protection at your sister's house. Lucy was amazing. She got Timothy out through the hidden space and called 911 from Mrs. Peterson's apartment." Relief washed over him, followed immediately by wariness. He studied the woman before him, the same gentle eyes, the same delicate hands that had carved chess pieces for Timothy. Yet suddenly, a stranger. "I think it's time you told me who you really are," he said quietly. Vivian's shoulders slumped. She nodded, drawing a deep breath. "My real name is Vivian Blackwood," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm the sole heir to Blackwood Industries. The men who attacked us work for Raymond Huxley, my parents' financial advisor who's been embezzling from our company since their deaths 3 years ago." Nathaniel listened in stunned silence as she explained how her parents' yacht accident had never felt right to her, how she'd begun finding discrepancies in the financial records, and how she'd gone into hiding when she realized Raymond might have orchestrated their deaths. "I never meant to involve you and your children," she said, tears welling in her eyes. That first night, when you invited me to dinner, I was so touched by your kindness. I told myself I'd only stay for that one meal, but then you kept coming back, Nathaniel finished for her. Yes. She looked down at her hands. I've been living a lie, and I put your family in danger because of it. The money you kept finding, that was me. Timothy's medical treatment, that was me too. I thought I was helping, but I just made everything worse. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. The mysterious woman he'd fallen for was actually a wealthy heiress in hiding. The simple dinners they'd shared, the lighthouse in the rain, the laughter over the failed science experiment, all while she carried this burden alone. Were you ever going to tell me? He finally asked. I wanted to, she whispered. Every day it got harder to keep lying to you. The night Timothy got sick, I almost told you everything. But I was afraid you'd look at me differently, afraid Raymond would find me through you. And now he has anyway. Vivian nodded miserably. I'm so sorry, Nathaniel. I'll understand if you want nothing more to do with me. She waited for his anger, his rejection, bracing herself for the hurt she deserved. But Nathaniel surprised her by slowly reaching for her hand. The woman who taught my son chess, who helped my daughter with her science project, who sang to Timothy in the hospital, was that a lie too? He asked. No, she whispered fiercely. That was always me. The real me. Then that's who I fell in love with, he said simply. Not your name or your money or whatever else comes with being a Blackwood. Just you. Vivian broke down then, tears streaming down her face as relief overwhelmed her. Nathaniel's hand tightened around hers, steady and warm despite everything. But we still have a problem, he said after giving her a moment to compose herself. This Raymond isn't going to stop coming after you. Vivian wiped her eyes. I have evidence, financial records showing his embezzlement. But the most damning proof is in my father's private safe at the estate. It's an antique system that Raymond hasn't been able to crack. My father showed me how it works when I was a teenager. Nathaniel's eyes lit up with sudden interest. What kind of system? A mechanical one. Gears and pressure plates hidden throughout the study. Raymond's brought in experts, but no one understands how it works. A smile slowly spread across Nathaniel's face despite his injury. You're looking at a mechanic who restores vintage engines for fun. If it's mechanical, I can figure it out. For the first time in days, hope flickered in Vivian's eyes. You'd help me? After everything? Those men came into my home and threatened my children, Nathaniel said, his voice hardening. And they hurt you. That makes this my fight too. Together, they began planning how to access the estate, retrieve the evidence, and expose Raymond's crimes once and for all. The moonlight cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Blackwood estate as Nathaniel and Vivian crouched behind a stone garden wall. The mansion loomed before them, its windows dark except for the security lights illuminating the perimeter. Raymond should be at the charity gala for another 2 hours, Vivian whispered, checking her watch. The security team makes rounds every 20 minutes. Nathaniel nodded, his eyes scanning the grounds with the methodical precision he usually reserved for diagnosing engine problems. Which entrance are we using? The greenhouse connects to my father's study through a hidden passage. He had it built so he could slip away from guests when he needed quiet time to work. A sad smile flickered across her face. I used to bring him tea through there when I was little. They moved silently across the lawn, Vivian leading the way with confident steps despite years away. When they reached the greenhouse, she pressed her palm against a seemingly ordinary panel of glass, revealing a fingerprint scanner disguised as part of the frame. They never removed my access, she murmured as the door clicked open. Inside, tropical plants created a humid canopy above them. Nathaniel followed Vivian to a decorative stone bench that, when pushed in a specific pattern, revealed a narrow staircase. "My father was quite the James Bond fan," she explained with a soft laugh. The passage led them directly into the study, a grand room lined with leather-bound books and dominated by an imposing mahogany desk. Vivian moved immediately to the fireplace while Nathaniel secured the door. "The safe mechanism is triggered by a sequence of pressure points throughout the room," she explained, running her fingers along the ornate mantelpiece. "Father designed it himself, but the mechanics have likely deteriorated over time." Nathaniel approached the fireplace, examining it with a mechanic's eye. "Show me the sequence." She guided him through the room, pointing out seemingly random decorative elements: a particular book on the shelf, a bronze paperweight, a specific key on the antique piano in the corner. As they moved together, their hands occasionally brushed, sending electric currents between them despite the tension of the moment. "The final trigger should activate when these points are pressed in sequence," Vivian said, "but it hasn't worked for anyone who's tried." Nathaniel knelt by the fireplace, examining the ancient mechanism with reverent hands. "The gears are likely stuck from disuse. The oil's probably hardened." He reached into his pocket and produced a small toolkit. "Good thing I came prepared." Vivian watched in admiration as Nathaniel's calloused fingers worked with surprising delicacy, applying drops of lubricant to key points and making minute adjustments to the alignment. "How did you know to bring those tools?" she asked. He glanced up, a half-smile playing on his lips. "When you mentioned an antique mechanical safe, I figured it might need some TLC. Machines are like people. They need care to keep working properly." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary before he turned back to his work. "Try the sequence again," he instructed. This time, when Vivian completed the pattern, a satisfying click echoed through the room. A panel beside the fireplace slid open, revealing a small compartment containing a leather portfolio. "You did it," she breathed, reaching for the documents with trembling hands. Inside were financial records, handwritten notes from her father expressing concerns about Raymond's activities, and most damning of all, evidence that Raymond had tampered with the yacht's navigation system before her parents' fatal trip. "This is everything we need," Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion. Nathaniel placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, and she covered it with her own. The moment was interrupted by the sound of voices in the hallway. "Security's early," Nathaniel whispered, quickly gathering the documents. Vivian's eyes darted around the room. "The passage won't work. They'll see us." Nathaniel spotted the large bay window. "Do you trust me?" he asked, extending his hand. Without hesitation, she took it. Completely. He led her to the window, opening it silently. Below was a decorative trellis covered in climbing roses. "I spent my childhood climbing things I shouldn't," he explained with a reassuring smile. "Follow my exact movements." Just as the study door began to open, Nathaniel helped Vivian onto the trellis. With practiced movements, he guided her down, finding secure footholds among the thorny vines. They reached the ground just as flashlight beams swept across the study above them. Hand in hand, they raced across the moonlit grounds, the portfolio of evidence clutched tightly against Vivian's chest. Their breath came in exhilarated gasps as they reached the property's edge and slipped through a gap in the hedgerow to where Nathaniel's truck waited. As they drove away, adrenaline still coursing through their veins, Vivian looked at Nathaniel with newfound appreciation. "We make a good team," she said softly. He glanced at her, his eyes warm in the dashboard light. "The best." Vivian clutched the portfolio to her chest as they drove away from the estate, her face flushed with triumph. "We did it, Nathaniel. With these documents, Raymond will finally—" Her phone buzzed. The screen displayed an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered and put it on speaker. "Hello, Vivian." Raymond's voice slithered through the car's interior. "Congratulations on your little heist. Very impressive. Nathaniel's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I believe I have something that might interest you more than those dusty old papers, Raymond continued. Lucy would like to say hello. Vina? Dad? Lucy's voice trembled. I'm scared. Nathaniel swerved the truck to the roadside, his face draining of color. If you hurt her. That depends entirely on you, Raymond cut in smoothly. Bring me the documents and Vivian's signature transferring control of the Blackwood companies to me. The marina. 1 hour. Come alone, or the girl pays for your heroics. The line went dead. No, 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 Nathaniel whispered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Not Lucy. I can't lose her too. Vivian placed a steadying hand on his arm. We won't lose her, Nathaniel. I promise you. The marina, he said, his voice hollow. Where your parents? Yes. Vivian's eyes hardened. Raymond's bringing this full circle. He thinks it gives him power, but he's wrong. During the tense drive to the marina, they formulated a plan. Vivian removed a small recording device from her purse, a habit she'd developed during her investigation. We need his confession, she said, activating it. And I need you to trust me one more time. The marina gleamed under the moonlight, waves lapping gently against the docks. Raymond stood at the end of the longest pier, Lucy beside him with his hand gripping her shoulder. The girl's eyes were wide with fear, but her chin was raised defiantly. Stay in position until my signal, Vivian whispered to Nathaniel, who nodded grimly before melting into the shadows between the boathouses. Vivian approached alone, the portfolio visible in her hands. Lucy's eyes lit with recognition, but Raymond's grip tightened, silencing any outburst. That's close enough, Raymond called when she was 10 feet away. Show me the documents. First, let Lucy go, Vivian countered, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. Raymond laughed. I don't think you understand the situation. You'll sign these papers, he produced a document from his jacket. Then hand over your father's evidence. Only then does the girl go free. Why did you kill them? Vivian asked suddenly, loud enough for the recording device to capture. My parents trusted you. Raymond's smile was cold. Charles was becoming suspicious of my financial management. The yacht trip presented a perfect opportunity, a tragic accident at sea. No one questioned the navigation system failure I engineered. His eyes gleamed with arrogance. The Blackwood fortune should have been mine decades ago. Your father was an idiot who inherited everything while I had to work for scraps. And now you'll finally have it all, Vivian said, stepping closer with the pen he offered. As she bent over the document, she deliberately dropped the pen. When Raymond instinctively looked down, Vivian shouted, Now! Nathaniel emerged from beneath the pier, where he'd silently swum into position. In one powerful movement, he grabbed Raymond's ankles and pulled. The man toppled backward with a surprised shout, losing his grip on Lucy. Run! Vivian commanded, grabbing Lucy and pushing her toward safety. Raymond recovered quickly, producing a gun from his jacket. You've made a terrible mistake, he snarled, aiming at Vivian. But Nathaniel was faster. Using the mechanical knowledge that had saved his family countless times, he'd already identified the pier's weakest point. He yanked hard on a corroded support beam, sending Raymond stumbling as the section of pier beneath him shifted. The gun fired wildly into the air as Raymond lost his balance and plunged into the dark water. By the time security guards and police, anonymously called by Vivian before their arrival, swarmed the marina, Raymond was sputtering at the end of a boat rope Nathaniel had used to secure him. Nathaniel crushed Lucy in an embrace, tears streaming down his face. I thought I'd lost you, he whispered into her hair. I knew you'd come, Lucy replied, her voice muffled against his chest. You and Vina, both. Vivian approached them cautiously, the recording device safely tucked away. When Lucy reached out to include her in their embrace, Vivian felt something unlock in her chest, a fear she'd carried since her parents' death, finally releasing its grip. "We did it," Nathaniel said, looking at Vivian over Lucy's head, his eyes shining with more than just relief. "Together." In the days following Raymond's arrest, Vivian found herself standing at a crossroads. The Blackwood Empire awaited her return. Board meetings, galas, and the rarefied air of privilege she'd escaped months ago. She stood at the window of her hotel suite, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, so different from the view in Nathaniel's modest apartment, yet somehow less beautiful. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Nathaniel entered, his sturdy frame silhouetted against the doorway. "The children are with Mrs. Rodriguez," he said. "I thought we should talk." Vivian nodded, her throat tight. "About what happens now?" "Yes." He crossed the room to stand beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You have your life back." "My life," she echoed. "I'm not sure I want that life anymore, Nathaniel." He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "What do you want then?" "That's what scares me," she admitted. "I want you. I want Lucy and Timothy. I want our dinners around that wobbly table and science experiments that explode all over the kitchen. But I'm afraid that I only want the Blackwood fortune." Nathaniel's voice was gentle but firm. "No," she said quickly, "that you won't want me with it. That the money will change everything between us." Nathaniel took her hands in his, calloused fingers enveloping her softer ones. "I fell in love with Vina, the woman who carved chess pieces for my son, who laughed until she cried when that volcano experiment went wrong, who looked at me like I was worth something when the rest of the world saw just another struggling mechanic." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Your money doesn't change who you are, Vivian. And it certainly doesn't change how I feel about you." Tears welled in her eyes. "But it changes everything else. Only if we let it." Nathaniel's voice grew stronger. "I don't need your wealth, but I'm not afraid of it either. I fell in love with all of you. Your compassion, your strength, your determination. The way you see the world. If your fortune is part of who you are, then I accept that too." Vivian felt something settle within her, a certainty she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. "I want to use it differently," she said. "I want to create a foundation to help families struggling like yours was. And I want to share my life with you, if you'll have me." His answer was a kiss that tasted of promise and new beginnings. 3 months later, they stood barefoot on the beach as the sun dipped toward the horizon. No elaborate decorations adorned the setting, just a simple arch of driftwood and wildflowers. The guests were few. Close friends, Nathaniel's colleagues from the garage, and the board members of Vivian's newly established Blackwood Family Foundation. Timothy, his cheeks flushed with health, proudly carried a small pillow with their rings. Lucy stood beside Vivian, her eyes shining with happiness. As they prepared to exchange vows, Lucy stepped forward, holding a glass case. Inside were the chess pieces Vivian had carved from scraps in Nathaniel's workshop all those months ago. The king and queen she'd shaped with careful hands during those first days of knowing them. "Dad, Vivian," Lucy said, her voice clear in the ocean breeze. "These remind us how everything started with something small, just dinner on a rainy night. The smallest kindness can change everything." Nathaniel's eyes glistened as he took the case, his fingers tracing the glass over the roughly carved pieces. "Perfect," he whispered, looking from the chess pieces to Vivian's face. "Just like us, not polished or fancy, but real." As they exchanged their vows with the ocean murmuring behind them, Vivian felt the final pieces of her life sliding perfectly into place. The woman who had hidden in shadows now stood in full sunlight, her true self finally seen and cherished. "I promise to always see you," Nathaniel said, sliding the ring onto her finger. No matter what disguises life might bring. Vivian's voice was steady as she repeated the same promise, knowing that in this man's eyes she would always be herself, neither the heiress nor the vagrant, but simply the woman he loved. If you enjoyed this story, I've found another special one just for you. Our community can't stop talking about how heartwarming and moving it is. Click on the video in front of you to experience this beautiful story before it's gone.